I would, however, caution people to not be overly confident in the latest research. You don't want to overplay your evidence. This research is based on wide-angle X-ray scattering technology, and that technology to use for dating is really new. It's only been cited a handful of times prior to this paper. Moreover, the study gets a date of 2,000 years old in the Shroud by assuming that the Shroud of Turin stayed between 68 and 72 degrees and 55 and 75% humidity for 2,000 years, which is a pretty big assumption. So that's just my caveat about this new Shroud research.
Given that tests on the Shroud since the 2000s, and then he's given 3 examples, have conclusively shown an origin around the 1st century AD.
But that's not the case.
It's not the case.
We don't have definitive proof that the Shroud is from the 1st century.
Okay.
I don't want to bring disrepute on the Christian faith by appealing to things that are going to be perceived as you're just twisting the evidence because you want to see it that way. Just because I want something to be true doesn't mean that I'm going to skew the evidence to get to that conclusion. I really try on this subject, as in every other subject, to check my confirmation bias and not allow myself to be guided by it. So just because I want it to be true does not mean I'm going to go any easier on the Shroud than I would anything else. The problem is, right now, the Carbon-14 testing that was done does not point to this being a 1st century artifact. Now, there are counter-arguments that says the carbon testing was done wrong or it wasn't reliable for one reason or another, but the mere fact that there was this Carbon-14 test, or set of tests actually, that were done at the same time by different institutions that all pointed to a medieval origin, or that pointed to a medieval origin, is something that can immediately be thrown in the face of any apologist who tries to present this as evidence for the Christian faith by a skeptic. And so the skeptic is going to say, hey, you're claiming this stuff, but the science says no. And at that point, the Christian apologist is at a severe tactical disadvantage, because probably neither he nor the skeptic nor anyone else listening to the conversation is an expert in Carbon-14 dating. And so not only does he have to mount a counter case that it is really 1st century, he also has to deal with the fact neither of us are experts, and under normal situations, both of us should be deferring to experts.
All we can know for certain is that before Turin, the Shroud can only be reliably traced back to the village of Lire in France, where it was in the possession of this man, Geoffroy de Charnay, who first exhibited it in 1360. That date is very significant because Carbon-14 dates the Shroud at 1325, plus or minus 65 years. It all seems to check out.
X-ray dating of a Turin Shroud's linen sample was published 2 years ago in Heritage, a journal with an impact factor of 1.7, which is not great. Impact factor is a flawed but convenient way to quickly see how reputable a journal might be. For instance, the impact factor of Nature, where that Radiocarbon study was published, is 50.5. So we're in the ones with Heritage. Again, it's a flawed metric, but worth mentioning. One co-author of this study immediately rang a bell for me. Giulio Fanti is a name I recognized from this Chemistry World article I read during my research. Richard Corfield wrote back in 2013 that Fanti had recently used spectroscopic methods to test samples of the Shroud taken in the 1970s. Fanti's results date the Shroud to between 300 BC and AD 400, a 700-year interval that nevertheless brackets the death of Christ. Corfield goes on to note that experts were skeptical of Fanti's results, in part because his technique is not only new, but seems to have been devised specifically to address the issue of the Turin Shroud. In short, the scientific cart seems to have been put in front of the methodological horse. That's important. Put a little pin in that. This technique was previously shown to be accurate in a study published 4 years prior, also in Heritage, and also by the very same authors. The researchers admit in their first paper, and also in this one, that this X-ray technique is only accurate if the textile in question has remained for the entirety of its life in a climate-controlled environment with a temperature between 20 and 22.5 degrees Celsius, which is 68 to 72.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and a relative humidity between 55 and 75%.
Which is a pretty big assumption.
So in order for this result to be accurate, the Shroud of Turin must have been kept in a climate-controlled environment for more than 2,000 years. But we know for a fact that the Shroud of Turin was absolutely not. How can I be so sure? Well, to give you just one little example, it caught on fire in 1532. For another example, it was in another fire in 1997. It may have been through 3 fires in its known history. There is absolutely no way that this thing made it through 2,000 years at room temperature.